This is the Bizgnus podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
The world may finally be seeing a glimmer of light at the end of that very long COVID tunnel, but before emerging from the tunnel, many businesses might want to rethink their strategies. Author and veteran business consultant Sean Ryan says it might be a good idea for some businesses to burn their tedious strategies because not enough attention is being devoted to helping staff at every level to understand and implement the strategies. He goes into what's behind his 7 gears to success in this Bizgnus podcast. Let's start, if you don't mind, by telling Sean, our listeners and our viewers, a little bit about yourself.
Background is I grew up in Ohio, went to university at Georgia Tech in Atlanta for my first degree. Actually have an MBA from Fresno State in California. Spent the first 7 years of my career at Pacific Gas and Electric in California. And incredibly formative years in terms of understanding organizations, leadership, those kind of things. And over my 7 years at PG&E, what I learned was I had a huge amount of respect for the company and the people in the company. But what I saw in this 28,000 person organization was people who really wanted to be unleashed, had a lot of passion, a lot of competence to be able to do the best they could, and yet, in spite of everybody's best intentions, it didn't always work out that way every day. So I got it in my mind that I wanted to do something a little bit different. And it started on what I now call this Don Quixotic mission that I've been on for over 30 years to create great organizations where people can do their best. Along the way, I've got 3 kids, lovely wife, and it's been a great journey.
Now, the problems at PG&E have certainly been well documented because of all the problems that occurred in that company after you left, and we must note. And I'm sure there's no relationship there at all, but just they are indicative of problems that a lot of companies have, and you said trying to unleash the talents and passion of the people who are working there. Why is it so hard to do that?
Doug, that's a phenomenal question, and hopefully we'll have part of the answer. I think everybody wants the best of intentions, and one of the things that I discovered at PG&E and we put in the book Get in Gear, I talk about the marshmallow layer, and it applies most acutely to communications, but I also think it applies a little bit just organizationally. And so the marshmallow layer, in short, is what I observed at PG&E and what I've seen in dozens of organizations since then, is you talk to people at the front line of the organization, and they want to do better things for customers, and they want to get the rules, policies, and procedures out of their way that are limiting their capability to be their best. And they recognize the opportunity to generate better profits if it's a for-profit organization, or just better outcomes if it's not for profit or a governmental organization. So you get the frontline people who see it that way. You go talk to the senior leaders of the organization. They see the same kind of things, but maybe they use a little bit different language about it. But they want better outcomes for the organization. They want to do better, perform better for customers or whoever the stakeholders are. And they recognize maybe the silly things that they put in people's way that keep them from being their best. And so you have people that are seeing the same things, but what they're seeing is completely disconnected from each other. It's like seeing 2 sides of an elephant and not both recognizing that you're looking at the same elephant in some ways. And so when we talk about it in the context of communications, we call it the marshmallow layer, that spongy mass in the middle. It just keeps information from flowing as efficiently as it ought to. But I think from a broader perspective, unintentionally, what we do in organizations sometimes is we don't have people aligned to what 100% aligned and focused on what they need to be doing every day to perform their best for the organization, or we somehow inadvertently put things in their way that keep them from being able to perform as best as they possibly can.
Is that because the manager slash leader, and I guess you can be both, although some people tend to be one or the other, is just not spending the time with the staff, or what?
I think there are a lot of things, and we subscribe to the theory, by the way, just as kind of a side note, as managers and leaders, they're the same, right? It's a different set of skills and competencies, different set of capabilities, both of which can be built and developed, but you have to be both good manager and a good leader simultaneously. So what I think happens is, first of all, things are constantly changing. And so being able to adapt to that change and have the people in my organization, the people that report to me, adapt to that change, that's one of the dynamics that keeps us from being perfectly aligned all the time, because we're trying to hit sometimes a pretty rapidly moving target. I think the other things that happen is there's just so much stuff going on every day. There's so many things grabbing for our attention. If we're not acutely focused on the priorities and then thinking about how do we align that all the way from the organizational level, from the strategy of the organization, how do we create great value for our customers or stakeholders, that strategy, and then align that all the way through the organization. And we have to be incredibly intentional about the effort to do that, because the second we're not intentional about it, with all the other things grabbing for our attention, and people are off someplace else doing something else, and performance is not aligned as it ought to be, right?
I guess that kind of brings up the question of is how far down, generally speaking, should you push the decision-making layer? Should it go right down to the people who are on the front line? And if so, how do you make sure they're making decisions that are dovetail with what you need to have the organization doing?
Well, first of all, the first answer is absolutely push responsibility down as far as you possibly can, right? And I talked in the intro about trying to create great organizations where people can perform their best. And so that automatically implies giving people the latitude and the responsibility to act. But then there's some things that come along with that. I mean, it's not just, hey, everybody run out and go do whatever you feel like doing. We have to intentionally align performance. And so as we talk about it in the book, we talk about these 7 gears that drive strategy to results. And 4 of the gears are what we call the performance gears. And they really are about aligning performance. So things like absolute clarity about the result-oriented goals that people need to have that connect to the strategy of the organization. So getting the goals right. And it's shocking to me when we walk into organizations, the first thing we ask is, what goals do you have? And a lot of people sometimes look at us, they have no goals. And then the second thing that happens is, for the people who do have goals, we play this game. We call it 5-on-5 because it got some sports implications to it, but it's also kind of catchy. And what we do is we ask the frontline team members, write down your top 5 goals, what you think the most important things are that you're supposed to be working on every day. And then we ask their managers, leaders to write down what they think the performers' top 5 goals are. And then we match the lists. On average,
matching those 2 lists is going to be pretty doggone hard, I would think.
And well, I do have to admit, we have to give liberal credit for the language people use. Okay. But even giving liberal credit for the language people use over literally thousands of repetitions, Doug, what we find is only 2 out of the 5 match, which means that 40% of the time people are working on the stuff that is aligned to the strategy, and the other 60% of the time, we don't know. Maybe they inadvertently contribute some stuff that is aligned to the strategy, and maybe they don't. And so right there, you can see one of those things that keeps organizations and individuals from performing their best. If we're not aligned on what we need to be doing, the odds of us getting great execution and great results are pretty limited.
And these days, as the nation is wallowing in the double punch of the COVID epidemic and also the perhaps COVID-caused recession, this must be even harder to implement. Do you find that to be the case?
Well, maybe harder to implement because you've got people working in different places. You got people working virtually. Unfortunately, you also have places where you don't even have people working, and organizations trying to sustain themselves with less than their full team. So harder, but at the same time, I would say more critical. I started this version of my consulting practice nearly 20 years ago, and I very intentionally called it Whitewater International Consulting. Now, some of that goes back to my university days when I spent all of my time trying to paddle as many whitewater rivers as I could. But that's a little piece of it. The big piece of it is even 20 years ago, we were talking about organizations having to thrive and survive in a world of perpetual whitewater. And if we didn't believe that was true before February, 2020, we all have to believe that that's true today. We're constantly having to deal with whatever the rapids are that get thrown our way. That might be COVID, but on a more day in and day out basis, it's changes in technology, changes in customer needs, expectations, demands, changes in competition, changes in the economy. And so we're constantly having to deal with this world of perpetual change. And it becomes more and more critical to align everybody's performance so that we're prepared to adapt to whatever the next change is.
Sean, it's probably time to tell our audience a little bit about this book that you have written. What's its name, for heaven's sakes?
The name of the book is Get in Gear, the 7 Gears that Drive Strategy to Results. And I wrote it because, well, first of all, in my own experience over 30 plus years of consulting, what we found was anecdotally, qualitatively, the organizations we were working with were having a hard time getting the results that they wanted out of their strategy. But as we researched it more and more, what we found is my experience was not unusual, it was not uncommon. Somewhere between 75 and 90% of organizations fall short of getting the results that they want from their strategy, what we call in the book the execution gap. Then, so I thought, wow, okay, my experience is not unusual. What are the things that it takes to really be able to execute more effectively? And we identified these 7 gears that connect strategy to results. So I guess maybe going into the 7 gears and not leaving it completely a mystery might be a good idea. Unless everybody wants to run out and buy the book right now, which would be awesome. So the 7 gears, we broke them into 2 sets of gears. And the first set we call the foundation gears. And they're the ones that apply to the whole organization and really create the environment where people can perform their best and strategy can be connected to results. So, nothing in this is going to be particularly shocking to people, but when you link it all together, it starts to make a whole lot of sense. So the first gear we call right, which is having the right people in the right roles with the right capabilities to be able to deliver the results. So you got to have the right skills, right capabilities. You have to have people that fit with the culture. Your culture has to align to the strategy. The second gear is around aligning the architecture. So we see a lot of organizations where people aren't performing the way we want them to, and maybe it's because they're being promoted or compensated for something different. So we want to align the architecture, the systems, the structures, the process, and the culture need to be aligned to the strategy. So I get rewarded for, recognized for the things that contribute to the real results that we're trying to get to, all right? So there's no sense in paying for X when I really want Y. So how do we align those things? And then we've kind of touched on the third gear a little bit already, that whole idea of creating a culture of communications. So information flows up, down, sideways, diagonally, wherever it needs to flow. If we're going to push responsibility and latitude to act down to people, they have to have the information so that they are taking action in the right way. And we also have to create an environment where people can hold the difficult conversations. It's an environment of trust and respect look, it's easier to hold a tough conversation if it's all from the perspective of we're trying to be the best we possibly can be. So those are the foundation gears. And then the other 4 gears are what we call the performance gears. And they're all about aligning the performance of individuals and teams to the strategy of the organization. We've talked about a couple of these a little bit already, but the first of those is setting result-oriented goals. So everybody's got to have goals. They are better when they're result-oriented. So that might mean instead of a salesperson who has an activity goal of making 50 sales calls a week, which is an activity, but I can make a whole lot of sales calls and never sell one unit, one service, one anything. It's making it result-oriented. So, my goal as a salesperson is to increase sales from 100,000 units to 125,000 units in the fourth quarter of 2020. A little bit subtle difference. So, and making sure that the goals for everybody, whether you're in sales or customer service or operations, is somehow aligned to the strategy of the organization. And then the next of the performance gears is visible scorecards. The idea that people need to have feedback visually on what their performance is. What's their scorecard look like? And the analogy I always use is if you drive down the street and you see kids playing on 2 basketball courts right next to each other, and on one court they're keeping score, and on the other court they're not keeping score. Now, they may all be having a lot of fun, but how quickly can you distinguish if you're standing 100 yards away or you're at the stoplight at the corner? How quickly can you distinguish between which court the kids are keeping score on and which ones they're just playing for fun? Generally, most of us can tell right away. There's this intensity that happens when we keep score. There's focus. There's more feedback. The players are holding each other accountable for playing the best that they possibly can be when we have a visible scorecard. The next of the performance gears is what we call performance drivers, which is fancy language, but it encompasses the idea of what are the critical activities, tasks, and behaviors people need to be doing to hit their goals. Well, a salesperson who's got to increase sales, they still have to make sales calls, but what is it that distinguishes, what are those behaviors that distinguish mediocre from great salespeople? And usually there are 2 or 3 or 4 things that really distinguish the great performers from the average performers. We want to identify what those performance drivers are and then help everybody build the capabilities to execute those performance drivers well. And then the last gear number 7, is the one that is the glue that holds everything together. We call it follow-up, follow-through. Now, part of follow-up, follow-through is creating accountability, but part of it is also generating learning. So I can't tell you when you go to set goals that you set the right goal, that your salesperson can actually sell 125 or 150,000 units this quarter. I don't know that. So we do want the salesperson to be accountable, but we also, if they're not hitting their goals, we want to understand why first. Was the goal wrong? Are they not executing their performance drivers well? Whatever that might be, we want to learn first, and then over time, if we change the performance system and they still can't hit the goals, then we have to create some accountability for actual execution.
Well, you have given our audience an MBA course in management here in just a few minutes. Follow that, and well, if they don't get the MBA, they'll certainly succeed, I would think, in business or any organization.
We kind of think so. We know that when people do these things, when you execute on each of those gears and you make each of them better, performance tends to get a lot better than it would be left unmanaged. That's for sure.
You have been very generous with sharing your thoughts and your insights. What would you like to add, Sean, that we haven't had a chance to talk about? And it could be anything.
Well, the thing most pertinent to the book, Doug, would be this: the 7 gears that drive strategy to results. One of the things we discovered, and as we played with it, is what distinguishes this is you don't have to fix every gear all at once. you can pick one. And so it's not like, I've got all these problems and we got a problem with our architecture, our compensation system, and we're not communicating effectively. And you don't have to fix all those today. If you just pick one and get it a little bit better today than it was last week, then you'll perform better. And then next week you can do next week or next month or next quarter, work on something else. And so the gears are kind of severable, even though they're completely connected, they're also severable, and you'll perform better to the extent that you perform better on any single gear.
Now, tell our audience where they can get more information about you and your company.
The best place to go is our website, which is it's wwici.com.
You'd better repeat that just to be sure.
Yes. Sure. Whitewater International Consulting, website, wwici.com.
There's a lot of W's in that one, all right. All right. Sean, thank you very much.
Doug, thank you. I much appreciate the time.
You've been watching the Bizgnus podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@bizgnus.com. Thanks for watching.